Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely wild. How AI, specifically large language models, is literally supercharging the speed of scientific breakthroughs. If you're fascinated by the intersection of AI and empirical science, you are definitely in the right place. We're going to break down some cutting-edge research to see exactly how researchers are building the autonomous labs of the future. Let's get right to it.
So think about this for a second. What if an AI could actually run a science lab? I mean, imagine a world where the painfully slow trial and error of finding new battery materials or, life-saving drugs is completely driven by an AI that learns, reasons, and actively directs robotic experiments in real time. We're not just talking about some sci-fi concept here, folks. We are talking about the very real pursuit of autonomous, self-driving laboratories. And honestly, a massive leap toward that reality was just published.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll hit 5 key areas. First, the scientific bottleneck. Then, the problem with traditional Bayesian optimization. After that, we'll introduce a new framework called LGBO. Visualize the fascinating math behind region lifting. And finally, look at some real-world lab results.
All right, starting with number 1, the scientific bottleneck and why these labs desperately need speed. Look, traditional scientific discovery, it is painfully slow. Whether you're hunting for a brand new lipid nanoparticle formulation or trying to design high-performance concrete, you run into this massive physical bottleneck. Because executing these experiments means mixing endless chemical combinations, testing them, observing the yield, and doing it all over again. It's an absolute grind. It's an enormous drain on resources, and more importantly, it drains time.
Moving on to Section 2, the problem with BO, or what we'll call the blindfolded hiker.
So, for a long time, the go-to algorithmic fix for this physical bottleneck has been Bayesian optimization, usually just called BO. I want you to think of BO kind of like a blindfolded hiker trying to find the tallest peak in a mountain range. The algorithm tests a few spots, builds this mathematical surrogate model to map out the terrain, and uses that to guess the next best experiment to run. But BO has a fatal flaw. It suffers from the cold start problem. At the very beginning, when experimental data is incredibly scarce, our hiker is quite literally fumbling in the dark. It takes so many expensive, wasted steps before the model actually gets a feel for the landscape.
Now, in the past, people tried fixing this cold start issue by giving it a warm start using an LLM. Basically, you'd ask the AI for a few smart starting points, give the algorithm a one-time shove in the right direction, and then just leave it to do its thing. But here's the catch. That one-time push just isn't enough to sustain momentum. Once that initial boost fades out, the algorithm goes right back to stumbling around in the dark. So, what's the new way? Continuous LLM guidance.
Which brings us to Section 3, a new approach called LGBO. This is basically the ultimate upgrade.
Okay, so here's the real game changer. LGBO stands for LLM-Guided Bayesian Optimization. And unlike those old methods that just offered a quick starting push, LGBO actually integrates the large language model's semantic reasoning continuously into the whole optimization loop. Let's bring back that hiker analogy for a second. LGBO is kind of like having a buddy with a topographic map walking right alongside our blindfolded hiker for the entire trip. Every single step of the way, this friend is whispering directions, constantly nudging the hiker toward the most promising areas based on deep semantic domain knowledge.
All right, Section 4, how region lifting works. Let's visualize the math here.
So here is the absolute secret sauce of this entire framework. It's a concept called region-lifted preference. Now, you can't just let a language model directly overwrite a strict, rigorous mathematical algorithm, right? That would cause total chaos. Instead, region-lifted preference takes these coarse, general LLM suggestions like, hey, maybe try looking near high temperature and low pressure, and translates them into lightweight mathematical priors. The absolute genius of this is that it shifts the surrogate mean without touching the covariance. Okay, in plain English, it essentially nudges the expected outcome higher in certain areas without messing up the algorithm's calculation of its own uncertainty.
At every single iteration, the LLM acts like an expert consultant. It looks over the experimental history and suggests a preferred region. But the really cool part is, it does this safely. It actually attaches its own confidence score to the suggestion. If the LLM is super confident because of its vast training in chemistry or physics, it pushes a bit harder, but if it's unsure, it backs off. This guarantees that the actual hard experimental data always remains the primary driver. The LLM doesn't overpower the science, it just gently guides it.
When you look at the math, the LLM's preference literally lifts the predictive curve in the areas it thinks are promising.
It smoothly nudges the search direction over. It isn't forcing the algorithm to test one rigid, specific point. It's just making an entire region look mathematically more attractive, basically steering the next experiment perfectly. It's so elegant.
And all of this builds a continuous, repeating loop. Step 1. We start with a semantic warm start to get things rolling. Step 2. The surrogate model makes its predictions based on the data. Step 3. We ask the LLM for its region preference based on what just happened. Step 4. We apply that region tilt, the math we just talked about. And finally, Step 5. The algorithm picks the next point, we run the actual physical experiment in the lab, and feed those results right back into Step 2. It's real-world data and LLM reasoning evolving together, in tandem, at every single step of the process.
Finally, Section 5, Real-World Lab Results. Let's look at the receipts.
The researchers didn't just leave this as theoretical math on a whiteboard. They unleashed LGBO on an absolute gauntlet of complex scientific benchmarks. We are talking about optimizing lipid nanoparticles for drug delivery, maximizing the toughness of 3D printed structures, pushing the compressive strength of concrete, and tuning high-performance liquid chromatography. And across the board, in all of these completely different domains, LGBO consistently crushed the existing baseline methods. It proved incredible versatility.
But this next one is the ultimate test. They took LGBO into a brand new wet lab experiment to optimize electrolytes for iron-chromium redox flow batteries. This is the real deal, a scenario with actual laboratory noise, very limited data, and absolutely no known perfect answer for the LLM to just regurgitate from its memory. And even in this tough scenario, LGBO absolutely rockets past the standard baseline methods. It dramatically outpaces traditional techniques right out of the gate.
Now, I really want to emphasize this number right here, 6. In that highly complex battery experiment, LGBO achieved 90% of the best observed value in just 6 iterations. Literally, just 6. The older baseline methods required more than 10 iterations just to get anywhere close to that level. When you're in a physical lab, saving those iterations means saving massive amounts of time, incredibly expensive materials, and human labor. It is just a monumental leap in efficiency.
The researchers wrapped this up beautifully, stating that LGBO offers a promising direction for integrating LLMs into scientific optimization workflows. They proved mathematically that this framework is completely safe, meaning it won't ever perform significantly worse than standard methods, even if the AI somehow gets confused. And empirically, they proved it is ridiculously fast when the AI's guidance lines up with the science.
So, that leaves us with this final, kind of mind-blowing thought. If we can now actually pair the strict, rigorous math of optimization algorithms with the vast semantic intuition of large language models, what impossible scientific breakthrough will continuous AI guidance discover next? We are literally watching the birth of the truly autonomous, self-driving laboratory. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.